For decades, the relationship between Canada and the United States stood as one of the strongest alliances in modern global history. It was built on trust, predictability, shared security interests, and deeply integrated economies. This partnership became so stable, so reliable, that it was often taken for granted. But under Donald Trump, that stability was not merely disrupted, it was deliberately dismantled. What happened between Canada and the United States during the Trump era was not a diplomatic misunderstanding. It was not a clash of personalities. It was a calculated strategy. A shift in American foreign policy that treated long-standing alliances not as partnerships but as leverage points. Under Trump, stability was no longer an asset. It became a weakness to be exploited. Trump believed that predictability reduced bargaining power. That calm diplomacy weakened pressure. That cooperation dulled dominance. His philosophy was simple: disruption creates leverage. Chaos forces concessions. And alliances only mattered if they could be weaponized. Canada became a prime test case for this worldview. Despite decades of cooperation, Canada was suddenly hit with aggressive trade threats, punitive tariffs, and hostile political rhetoric. Steel and aluminum tariffs were imposed under the justification of national security, even though Canada was one of America's most reliable and trusted suppliers. The message was unmistakable: loyalty would not protect you. Stability would not shield you. Integration would not save you. This was economic coercion in its purest form. Tariffs were not used as policy tools. They were deployed as weapons. They raised costs across industries. They disrupted supply chains. They created economic uncertainty. They applied political pressure inside Canada. And they signaled that the United States was willing to sacrifice efficiency, trust, and even its own economic interests to extract leverage. At the same time, Trump escalated his rhetorical campaign. Statements suggesting that Canada could become the 51st state were not jokes. They were strategic signals. Signals designed to question Canadian sovereignty. Signals meant to reinforce power asymmetry. Signals aimed at psychologically reframing the relationship from partnership to dominance. This language was not accidental. It was calculated. It was intended to weaken Canada's negotiating position by shifting the emotional and political ground beneath it. Under Trump, decision-making became intensely centralized. Trade policy, diplomacy, and economic pressure were driven directly from the presidency. This allowed tactics to be deployed with speed, unpredictability, and shock value. Tariffs could appear overnight. Threats could erupt through social media. Long-standing negotiations could be upended instantly. Canada was no longer dealing with institutions. It was dealing with impulses. This asymmetry was intentional. It placed Canada in a constant defensive posture, forced to react to political volatility rather than engage in structured diplomacy. Predictability became vulnerability. Cooperation became exposure. Stability became weakness. Washington assumed that Canada's geography, economic integration, and political restraint would prevent serious resistance. It believed Canada would absorb disruption quietly to preserve calm. That assumption proved to be a historic miscalculation. Instead of bending, Canada hardened. Rather than capitulate, Canada began reducing its exposure. Domestic industries were reinforced. Trade partnerships were diversified. Regulatory independence was strengthened. Diplomatic outreach expanded beyond North America. Canada shifted from dependency toward resilience. This was not disengagement. It was strategic maturity. Canada stopped assuming American political stability was guaranteed. It prepared for volatility. It built economic redundancy. It strengthened national autonomy. And in doing so, it reshaped its position within the global system. Meanwhile, American industries absorbed the damage. Corporate leaders warned that tariffs would raise production costs, disrupt investment, and weaken competitiveness. Manufacturers cautioned that integrated supply chains could not absorb sudden political shocks. Exporters feared lost markets. Investors feared uncertainty. Those warnings were ignored. As tariffs took effect, U.S. companies paid the price. Costs surged. Profit margins shrank. Investments slowed. Jobs came under pressure. Consumers faced higher prices. The very industries Trump claimed to protect became collateral damage in his pressure campaign. And beyond North America, the consequences were even greater. If the United States was willing to weaponize its relationship with its closest ally, then no partnership was truly safe. Countries around the world took note. Strategic hedging accelerated. Economic diversification expanded. Dependence on Washington was reduced. Global trust in American leadership began to erode. What unfolded between Canada and the United States under Trump was not chaos. It was design. A deliberate strategy of disruption. A calculated gamble that dominance could replace diplomacy. Instead, it produced resistance, realignment, and long-term strategic consequences that continue to reshape global politics. What began as a campaign of pressure ended as a lesson in power. Canada did not collapse. It recalibrated. It did not retreat. It evolved. And in doing so, it exposed the limits of coercion in a world where resilience matters more than dominance. The strategy meant to weaken Canada ultimately strengthened it. The pressure meant to force compliance instead produced independence. And the disruption meant to showcase power ended up revealing vulnerability. This was not just a breakdown of diplomacy. It was a turning point in global politics. Because when even the closest alliances can be weaponized, every nation must prepare for uncertainty. And when stability is treated as weakness, resilience becomes the ultimate strength. The era of automatic trust is over. The era of strategic adaptation has begun. And this shift will shape the world far beyond North America.
Canada debates.